Captain Sarah Mitchell had always been known for her unwavering composure under pressure. At 34, she had logged over 3,000 flight hours in some of the most advanced aircraft the military had to offer. Her colleagues at Edwards Air Force Base respected her not just for her technical skills, but for her ability to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. On this particular morning in November, however, something felt different. The hangar buzzed with activity as ground crews performed their final checks on the experimental aircraft designated X-47B. This wasn't just any routine mission. The Pentagon had been pushing for accelerated testing of this new stealth technology, and today's flight would determine whether the program would receive full funding or face potential cancellation. Millions of dollars and countless careers hung in the balance. Mitchell walked slowly around the aircraft, her trained eyes scanning every surface, every joint, every component. The X-47B represented the cutting edge of military aviation technology, incorporating systems that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible just a decade earlier. Its sleek, angular design seemed almost alien against the backdrop of conventional aircraft in the hangar. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, approached with purposeful strides. His weathered face bore the expression of a man who had seen too many delays and too many excuses. The pressure from Washington had been mounting for weeks, and today's test flight was critical to maintaining the program's momentum. "Captain Mitchell, we're cleared for launch in 30 minutes, Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with his rank. "Weather conditions are optimal, and all systems show green across the board." Mitchell continued her inspection, running her hand along the aircraft's wing edge. Something about the maintenance logs from the previous evening had caught her attention during her pre-flight briefing. A minor hydraulic pressure variance had been noted and supposedly corrected, but the documentation seemed incomplete. The hangar fell into an unusual quiet as technicians completed their tasks and stepped back. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had overseen the aircraft's preparation, gave Mitchell a confident thumbs up. Rodriguez had been working on experimental aircraft for over 20 years, and his expertise was trusted throughout the base. Mitchell climbed into the cockpit and began her systematic pre-flight checks. Each switch, each display, each system received her full attention. The aircraft's advanced computer systems hummed quietly as they ran through their initialization sequences. Everything appeared normal, yet a nagging feeling of unease continued to grow in her mind. Through the cockpit's canopy, she could see the assembled crowd of engineers, military officials, and contractors who had gathered to witness this crucial test. Some had traveled from across the country specifically for this demonstration. The success or failure of today's mission would ripple through the defense industry and potentially affect national security strategies for years to come. As Mitchell completed her checks, she noticed a subtle inconsistency in the hydraulic system readings. The pressure levels were within acceptable parameters, but they fluctuated in a pattern that didn't match her experience with similar aircraft. She made a note in her flight log and continued with the checklist. The control tower crackled to life in her headset. "X-47B, this is Tower Control. You are cleared for taxi to runway 07. Weather remains favorable with light winds from the northwest." Mitchell acknowledged the transmission but remained seated in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the hydraulic display. The fluctuation pattern had become more pronounced, though still within technical specifications. Her extensive training had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts were now sending clear warning signals. Colonel Harrison's voice came through on the command frequency. "Captain Mitchell, we're running behind schedule. Is there a problem with the aircraft?" Mitchell paused before responding. She knew that dozens of people were depending on this test flight proceeding as planned. Contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars were at stake. The careers of everyone involved in the program could be affected by any delay. Yet her responsibility as a test pilot was clear: never compromise safety for schedule or politics. She opened the maintenance logs on her tablet and cross-referenced the hydraulic system reports from the past week. A pattern began to emerge that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The pressure variances weren't random. They followed a cycle that suggested a potential failure mode in one of the primary hydraulic pumps. The ground crew chief appeared at the side of the aircraft, holding up 5 fingers to indicate 5 minutes until the scheduled launch time. Mitchell nodded but made no move to start the taxi procedures. Instead, she initiated a more detailed diagnostic of the hydraulic system, diving deeper into subsystem data that wasn't part of the standard pre-flight check. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Deep within the system logs, buried in technical data that most pilots wouldn't examine, were indicators of metal fatigue in a critical pump component. The part was still functioning, but the data suggested it was approaching failure. In a conventional aircraft, this might result in degraded performance. In an experimental aircraft pushing the boundaries of technology, it could be catastrophic. Mitchell's hands moved deliberately across the control panel, shutting down systems she had just activated. The decision crystallized in her mind with absolute clarity. She would not take this aircraft into the sky, regardless of the consequences. The risks were simply too great, not just to herself, but to everyone on the base and potentially to civilians in the surrounding area. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the radio with increasing urgency. "Captain Mitchell, we need to launch now. We have a narrow weather window and Washington is expecting results." Mitchell took a deep breath and keyed her microphone. Her response would shock everyone listening and set in motion a chain of events that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. She knew that her career might be over before she finished speaking, but she also knew that some decisions transcended personal consequences. The moment had arrived when training, experience, and moral courage would converge into a single, defining choice that would reveal the true character of everyone involved. Captain Mitchell's voice cut through the radio static with crystal-clear authority. "Tower, this is X-47B. I am aborting the mission." "Repeat mission abort. Aircraft is not safe for flight." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. In the control tower, air traffic controllers exchanged bewildered glances. On the tarmac, ground crews froze in place, unsure whether they had heard correctly. In the observation area, engineers and military officials stared at the motionless aircraft in disbelief. Colonel Harrison's response came swift and sharp. "Captain Mitchell, clarify your transmission. Are you declaring an emergency?" Mitchell remained calm as she began shutting down the aircraft systems in the proper sequence. "Negative on emergency, sir. I am declaring the aircraft unsafe for flight due to hydraulic system anomalies that indicate potential catastrophic failure." The radio erupted with competing voices as various personnel tried to understand what was happening. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez rushed toward the aircraft, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He had personally overseen every aspect of the pre-flight preparation and was confident in the aircraft's condition. In the command center, tension escalated rapidly. General Patricia Walsh, who had flown in from the Pentagon specifically for this test, watched the unfolding situation with growing frustration. This was her program, her career advancement opportunity, and now a single pilot was threatening to derail months of careful planning. "Get me a direct line to that pilot," General Walsh commanded, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made subordinates move quickly. Within seconds, she was connected to Mitchell's radio frequency. "Captain Mitchell, this is General Walsh. I need you to explain exactly what you think. You've discovered that wasn't caught by our team of expert engineers and technicians." Mitchell continued her shutdown procedures while responding. "General, I've identified a cyclic pressure variation in the primary hydraulic system that correlates with fatigue indicators in pump assembly 7 alpha. The pattern suggests imminent component failure." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead engineer for the hydraulic systems, rushed to her computer terminal and began pulling up diagnostic data. She had designed much of the system herself and was intimately familiar with every component. As she analyzed the real-time telemetry from the aircraft, her confidence began to waver. "General, I'm seeing the pressure variations Captain Mitchell mentioned," Dr. Vasquez reported. "They're within acceptable parameters, but the pattern is unusual." Colonel Harrison climbed into a ground vehicle and drove rapidly toward the aircraft. As the base commander, he had ultimate responsibility for the safety of all operations, but he also understood the political and financial pressures surrounding this program. A delay could mean congressional hearings, budget cuts, and the potential termination of a project that represented years of development. Mitchell completed her shutdown sequence and opened the cockpit canopy. The cool November air provided a sharp contrast to the tension that had been building inside the aircraft. She could see people converging on her position from multiple directions, and she knew that the next few minutes would be crucial. Rodriguez reached the aircraft first, his weathered hands already moving to connect ground power and begin whatever inspection Mitchell deemed necessary. Despite the pressure from above, his primary concern remained the safety of the pilot and the aircraft. "Captain, walk me through what you found," Rodriguez said, his voice steady and professional. "I've been working these birds for 20 years and I want to understand." Mitchell retrieved her tablet and showed Rodriguez the diagnostic data she had uncovered. As she explained the correlation between the pressure variations and the fatigue indicators, she could see understanding dawn in the sergeant's experienced eyes. Meanwhile, in the command center, a heated discussion was taking place between General Walsh and the program's senior staff. The financial implications of delaying the test were staggering. Each day of delay cost approximately $200,000 in operational expenses alone. More importantly, Congress was scheduled to review the program's funding in just 2 weeks. Dr. Vasquez continued her analysis, diving deeper into the system's historical data. What she discovered made her stomach tighten with apprehension. The pressure variations that Mitchell had identified weren't random fluctuations. They were following a mathematical progression that indicated progressive component degradation. "General, I need to speak with you privately," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Harrison arrived at the aircraft and immediately climbed the access ladder to speak with Mitchell face to face. His expression was grave, reflecting the competing pressures he faced as both a military officer and a leader responsible for his people's safety. "Captain, I need you to be absolutely certain about this," Harrison said quietly. "There are careers and contracts and national security implications at stake here. If you're wrong, this program dies today. If you're right and we launch anyway..." Mitchell met his gaze directly. "Sir, I understand the stakes. I also understand that my primary duty is to ensure this aircraft doesn't become a crater somewhere in the desert, or worse, in a populated area." The crowd around the aircraft continued to grow as word of the abort spread throughout the base. Technicians, engineers, administrative staff, and other pilots gathered at a respectful distance, all trying to understand what was happening to their prestigious program. General Walsh emerged from the command center and strode toward the aircraft with determination. Her political instincts told her that this situation needed to be contained quickly before it attracted unwanted attention from oversight committees or the media. Dr. Vasquez hurried to catch up with the general, carrying a tablet loaded with fresh analyses. "General, please wait. I've found something that confirms Captain Mitchell's concerns." The engineer's words stopped General Walsh in her tracks. If the lead engineer was now supporting the pilot's assessment, the situation had become far more complicated than a simple case of pilot nervousness or excessive caution. As the key players converged on the aircraft, Mitchell remained calm and professional. She had made her decision based on the best available evidence and her professional judgment. Whatever consequences followed, she knew she had acted according to her training and her conscience. The next few minutes would determine not only the fate of the X-47B program, but also the careers of everyone involved. Mitchell prepared herself for what she knew would be one of the most challenging conversations of her military career. Dr. Vasquez reached General Walsh just as the general arrived at the aircraft. The engineer's face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her tablet displaying the troubling data analysis. "General, we need to ground this aircraft immediately," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice urgent but controlled. Captain Mitchell's instincts were correct. The hydraulic pump is showing clear signs of imminent failure. General Walsh stopped abruptly, her political calculations suddenly shifting as the technical evidence began to support the pilot's decision. She had built her career on making tough decisions, but this situation presented a complexity that went beyond simple risk assessment. Colonel Harrison overheard the engineer's words and felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that his pilot had potentially prevented a catastrophe, and apprehension about the inevitable investigation and political fallout that would follow. Mitchell climbed down from the cockpit, her movements deliberate and professional. She had removed her helmet, and her short brown hair showed the slight dampness that came from the stress of the situation. Despite the pressure, her demeanor remained calm and focused. "Dr. Vasquez, can you explain your findings to everyone present?" Mitchell asked, recognizing that the engineers, Support would be crucial in justifying her decision to abort the mission. Dr. Vasquez activated her tablet's presentation mode and began displaying the hydraulic system data on the portable screen. The charts and graphs meant little to most of the assembled personnel, but to the engineers and experienced maintenance staff, the story they told was clear and alarming. The pressure fluctuations that Captain Mitchell identified follow a classic fatigue failure pattern, Dr. Vasquez explained. When I correlated this data with the pump's operational history, it became clear that we're looking at metal fatigue in the primary impeller assembly. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez studied the data carefully, his decades of experience with aircraft systems helping him understand the implications. Doc, how much time do we have before complete failure? Based on the progression rate, I estimate anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours of operation before catastrophic failure, Dr. Vasquez replied grimly. In flight, at altitude, with the stresses of the test profile, it could happen even sooner. The assembled crowd began to murmur as the implications of the engineer's assessment became clear. A hydraulic failure in the X-47B wouldn't just mean a hard landing. It could mean total loss of control and a crash that would endanger everyone within miles of the base. General Walsh found herself in an impossible position. The political pressure to proceed with the test was enormous, but the technical evidence now clearly supported aborting the mission. Her next decision would be scrutinized by investigators, congressional committees, and military historians for years to come. Captain Mitchell, I need to understand your decision-making process, General Walsh said, her tone more respectful than accusatory. Walk me through exactly how you identified this problem when our extensive pre-flight inspections missed it. Mitchell organized her thoughts carefully before responding. She knew that her explanation would likely be quoted in official reports and possibly congressional testimony. General, during my pre-flight checks, I noticed subtle pressure variations in the hydraulic system that didn't match my experience with similar aircraft. Rather than dismissing these as within normal parameters, I chose to investigate further. She paused, gathering her tablet to show the progression of her analysis. When I examined the historical maintenance data, I found a pattern of gradually increasing pressure variations over the past several weeks. This pattern is consistent with progressive component degradation. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. Captain, your thoroughness potentially saved lives today. However, I need to understand why this wasn't caught during our standard inspection procedures. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward to address this question. Sir, our standard pre-flight checks examine current system status, not historical trends. Captain Mitchell went beyond the required checklist and performed what amounts to a forensic analysis of the system's operational history. The implication was clear. Mitchell had done more than her job required, while the standard procedures had proven inadequate for detecting this type of failure mode. General Walsh realized that she was witnessing something significant. This wasn't just about a single aborted mission or even a single aircraft program. The way the situation was handled would set precedents for pilot authority, safety protocols, and the balance between operational pressures and safety concerns. Dr. Vasquez, how long will it take to replace the faulty pump and return the aircraft to flight status? General Walsh asked. Assuming we have the replacement parts available, we're looking at approximately 72 hours for the replacement and subsequent testing, the engineer replied. However, I strongly recommend a complete review of our inspection procedures to prevent similar issues in the future. The crowd around the aircraft continued to grow as word spread throughout the base. Other pilots, particularly those involved in test programs, watched the proceedings with keen interest. How this situation was resolved would affect their own understanding of their authority and responsibilities. Mitchell observed the reactions of her colleagues and superiors. Knowing that her career hung in the balance, she had made the right decision from a safety standpoint. But military careers had been ended for less controversial choices. The political ramifications of delaying such a high-profile program were significant. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached General Walsh with a suggestion. General, if I may, Captain Mitchell's actions today demonstrate exactly the kind of judgment and attention to detail we want in our test pilots. Perhaps we should be asking how we can incorporate her analytical approach into our standard procedures. The suggestion was both a defense of Mitchell's actions and a practical proposal for improving safety protocols. It shifted the conversation from blame assignment to process improvement. which appealed to General Walsh's leadership instincts. Colonel Harrison saw an opportunity to support his pilot while addressing the broader implications. "General, I recommend we use this incident to strengthen our safety protocols rather than view it as a failure of our current systems." As the discussion continued, Mitchell remained quiet but alert. She had done her job according to her training and her conscience. The consequences, whatever they might be, would have to be accepted. But she took comfort in knowing that the right decision had been made, regardless of the political or career implications. The decision about how to proceed would ultimately rest with General Walsh, but the technical evidence and growing support for Mitchell's judgment were creating momentum for a thorough review of both the aircraft and the inspection procedures. General Walsh stood silently for several moments, processing the information and weighing her options. The assembled personnel waited respectfully, understanding that the general's next words would shape not only the immediate situation, but potentially influence military aviation safety protocols for years to come. "Dr. Vasquez, I want you to assemble a team immediately to perform a complete teardown inspection of that hydraulic pump," General Walsh finally announced. "I want to know exactly what Captain Mitchell discovered and how close we came to a potential disaster." The order sent a ripple of activity through the crowd. Maintenance technicians began preparing for an intensive inspection that would either vindicate Mitchell's decision or reveal it to be overly cautious. Either way, the investigation would provide valuable data for future operations. Mitchell felt a mixture of relief and continued apprehension. While the general's decision to investigate suggested support for her judgment, the ultimate verdict would depend on what the physical inspection revealed. If the pump proved to be in better condition than the data suggested, her career could still be in jeopardy. Colonel Harrison addressed the assembled personnel. "I want everyone not directly involved in the investigation to return to their normal duties. This base has other critical missions that require our attention." As the crowd began to disperse, several of Mitchell's fellow test pilots approached to offer their support. Captain James Wright, who had been scheduled for the next test flight in the program, shook her hand firmly. "You did the right thing, Sarah," Wright said quietly. "Better to be safe and have to explain a delay than to be sorry and have to explain a crater." The comment reflected the tight-knit culture among test pilots, who understood better than anyone the delicate balance between pushing boundaries and maintaining safety. Their profession required them to take calculated risks, but also to know when those risks became unacceptable. Dr. Vasquez organized her inspection team with military efficiency. The teardown of the hydraulic pump would be a complex procedure requiring specialized tools and expertise. Every component would be examined, measured, and analyzed to determine its condition and remaining service life. "Captain Mitchell, I'd like you to participate in the inspection," Dr. Vasquez requested. "Your analysis led to this discovery, and your input during the teardown could be valuable." Mitchell nodded gratefully. Participating in the inspection would allow her to see firsthand whether her concerns were justified and would demonstrate her commitment to understanding the technical aspects of her decision. "General," Walsh pulled Colonel Harrison aside for a private conversation. The political implications of the situation were becoming clearer, and both officers understood that their handling of this incident would be scrutinized at the highest levels of command. "Jim, what's your assessment of Captain Mitchell?" General Walsh asked quietly. "She's one of our best, General. Technically proficient, safety-conscious, and not prone to unnecessary dramatics. If she says there's a problem, I'm inclined to believe her until proven otherwise." The endorsement carried weight coming from an experienced base commander who had worked with dozens of test pilots over his career. Harrison's reputation for straight talk and sound judgment made his opinion particularly valuable. In the maintenance hangar, preparations for the pump inspection were proceeding rapidly. Specialized equipment was being positioned around the aircraft, and documentation procedures were being established to ensure that every aspect of the teardown would be recorded for analysis. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez supervised the initial preparations, his experienced team working with practiced precision. The hydraulic pump was located deep within the aircraft's systems, requiring the removal of multiple components before it could be accessed. "This is going to take several hours just to reach the pump," Rodriguez informed Dr. Vasquez. "Once we get it out, The detailed inspection will require another 6 to 8 hours. The timeline meant that definitive results wouldn't be available until the following morning at the earliest. The uncertainty would be difficult for everyone involved, but particularly for Mitchell, whose professional reputation hung in the balance. Meanwhile, word of the aborted mission was beginning to spread beyond Edwards Air Force Base. The X-47B program had attracted significant attention from defense contractors, congressional oversight committees, and the media. News of a safety-related delay would inevitably generate questions and speculation. General Walsh contacted her superiors at the Pentagon to provide an initial briefing on the situation. The conversation was necessarily brief, but she emphasized the potential safety issues and the professional manner in which the situation was being handled. Mitchell returned to her quarters to wait for the inspection results. The small apartment on base felt confining after the day's events, and she found herself reviewing her decision repeatedly. Had she been too cautious? Had she properly interpreted the data? The questions would continue until the physical evidence provided answers. Dr. Vasquez remained in the hangar, personally overseeing every aspect of the inspection preparation. As the lead engineer for the hydraulic systems, she felt a personal responsibility to ensure that the investigation was thorough and objective. If there was indeed a design flaw or maintenance issue, she needed to understand it completely. The maintenance team worked through the evening, carefully removing components to access the hydraulic pump. Each removed part was tagged, documented, and stored according to strict protocols that would preserve the chain of evidence for any subsequent investigations. Colonel Harrison made rounds throughout the base, checking on other operations and ensuring that the focus on the X-47B investigation didn't compromise other critical missions. His leadership philosophy emphasized maintaining perspective even during crisis situations. As night fell over Edwards Air Force Base, the investigation continued under bright hangar lights. The careful work required to access and remove the hydraulic pump could not be rushed. Despite the urgency of obtaining answers, General Walsh worked late into the evening, preparing reports and coordinating with officials in Washington. The political pressure to minimize the impact of the delay was significant, but she was determined to ensure that safety considerations remained paramount. The base settled into an uneasy quiet as most personnel completed their duties and returned to their quarters. But in Hangar 7, the investigation team continued their meticulous work, knowing that their findings would determine whether Captain Mitchell was a hero who had prevented a disaster or an overly cautious pilot who had unnecessarily disrupted a critical program. The truth lay buried deep within the aircraft's mechanical systems, waiting to be revealed by careful analysis and expert judgment. The morning sun cast long shadows across Edwards Air Force Base as Captain Mitchell arrived at Hangar 7. She had slept poorly, her mind repeatedly analyzing the events of the previous day and the potential outcomes of the ongoing investigation. The maintenance team had worked through the night, and she could see the fatigue in their faces as they continued their methodical work. Dr. Vasquez emerged from beneath the aircraft, her coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and her expression grim. The hydraulic pump had finally been extracted in the early morning hours, and the initial visual inspection had revealed troubling signs. "Captain Mitchell, you need to see this," Dr. Vasquez said, leading her to a workbench where the pump assembly lay disassembled under bright examination lights. The pump's primary impeller showed clear signs of stress fractures, with hairline cracks visible even to the untrained eye. More concerning were the metal shavings found in the hydraulic fluid reservoir, indicating that the pump had already begun shedding material during operation. "My God," Mitchell whispered, studying the damaged components. "This would have failed catastrophically during flight." Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez joined them at the workbench, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of vindication and concern. "Captain, your decision yesterday saved lives, no question about it. This pump wouldn't have lasted 30 minutes under flight stress. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The pressure variations that Mitchell had detected in the aircraft's systems were the early warning signs of impending mechanical failure. Her decision to abort the mission had prevented what could have been a tragic accident." Dr. Vasquez continued her examination, documenting every crack, every sign of wear, every indication of the pump's deteriorating condition. The data would become part of an official investigation that would likely result in significant changes to inspection, procedures, and maintenance protocols. General Walsh arrived at the hangar shortly after sunrise, accompanied by Colonel Harrison and several senior staff officers. The general's face was stern but not unsympathetic as she surveyed the evidence laid out on the workbench. "Dr. Vasquez, give me your professional assessment," General Walsh requested. "General, this pump was in the final stages of fatigue failure. Based on the crack propagation patterns and material degradation, I estimate it would have failed within 15 to 20 minutes of high-stress operation." The assessment confirmed Mitchell's worst fears about what could have happened if the mission had proceeded. A hydraulic failure during the aggressive test profile, planned for the X-47B, would have resulted in complete loss of control and almost certain destruction of the aircraft. Colonel Harrison studied the damaged components with the eye of an experienced pilot who understood the critical role of hydraulic systems in aircraft control. "Dr. Vasquez, how did our standard inspection procedures miss this level of deterioration?" The question struck at the heart of the issue. If standard procedures were inadequate to detect such serious problems, then other aircraft in the fleet could be at risk, sir. Our current inspection protocols focus on functional testing rather than predictive analysis, Dr. Vasquez explained. The pump was still operating within specified parameters, but the underlying structural integrity was compromised. General Walsh recognized the broader implications immediately. This wasn't just about one aircraft or one mission. It was about systemic issues in how the military maintained and inspected its most advanced aircraft. "I want a complete review of our inspection procedures for all experimental aircraft," General Walsh ordered. "And I want Captain Mitchell's analytical approach incorporated into our standard protocols." The announcement represented a significant validation of Mitchell's actions and judgment. Rather than being criticized for excessive caution, she was being recognized for innovative thinking that had potentially prevented a disaster. Mitchell felt a profound sense of relief mixed with professional satisfaction. Her decision to trust her instincts and dig deeper into the aircraft's systems had been vindicated by the physical evidence. The stress and uncertainty of the past 18 hours began to dissipate. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Mitchell with obvious respect. "Captain, I've been working on aircraft for over 20 years. And I've never seen a pilot catch something like this during a routine pre-flight. Your attention to detail was exceptional." The praise from an experienced maintenance professional meant a great deal to Mitchell. The relationship between pilots and maintenance crews was built on mutual trust and respect, and Rodriguez's endorsement carried significant weight. Dr. Vasquez began preparing her formal report on the pump failure, knowing that her findings would be scrutinized by investigators and used to improve safety procedures across the fleet. The technical details would be complex, but the basic conclusion was clear. Mitchell had prevented a potentially catastrophic accident. General Walsh pulled Mitchell aside for a private conversation. The general's demeanor had shifted from skeptical authority figure to respected colleague, reflecting her recognition of Mitchell's professional competence. "Captain, I want you to know that your actions yesterday demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and initiative we need in our test pilots," General Walsh said. "You potentially saved lives and preserved a critical program." The words carried additional weight coming from a general who had initially been skeptical of Mitchell's decision. Professional recognition from someone of General Walsh's stature would be valuable for Mitchell's career advancement. "Colonel," Harrison announced that the base would be conducting an immediate review of all experimental aircraft currently in service. The lessons learned from Mitchell's discovery would be applied across the entire test program to identify any similar issues before they resulted in accidents. The investigation team continued documenting their findings, creating a comprehensive record that would be used by engineers and safety experts to improve aircraft design and maintenance procedures. The damaged pump would be sent to specialized laboratories for metallurgical analysis to understand exactly how the failure had developed. Mitchell realized that her refusal to launch the previous day had transformed from a potential career-ending decision into a defining moment that would likely be studied in military aviation schools for years to come. Her willingness to trust her professional instincts despite enormous pressure had proven to be exactly the right choice. As word of the investigation results spread throughout the base, Mitchell found herself receiving congratulations from colleagues who understood the significance of her actions. The test pilot community was small and tight-knit, and preventing a potential disaster earned lasting respect. The X-47B program would continue after the necessary repairs and procedural improvements were implemented, but it would be a better and safer program because of the lessons learned from Mitchell's careful analysis and decisive action. 3 weeks after the incident, Captain Mitchell found herself in an unfamiliar position, sitting before a congressional subcommittee in Washington, D.C. The story of her refusal to launch and the subsequent discovery of the catastrophic pump failure had reached the highest levels of government, triggering a formal investigation into military aviation safety protocols. The hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, defense contractors, and military officials. Mitchell had testified before review boards many times during her career, but never under such intense public scrutiny. The bright television lights and clicking cameras created an atmosphere unlike anything she had experienced. Congressman Robert Davies, the subcommittee chairman, called the hearing to order with a statement that recognized the significance of the case. Captain Mitchell's actions have potentially saved lives and revealed serious gaps in our military's aircraft inspection procedures. Today we seek to understand how these gaps developed and what must be done to prevent similar situations in the future. Mitchell's testimony was clear and methodical. She explained her analysis of the hydraulic system data, her decision-making process, and the subsequent investigation that confirmed her concerns. Her calm professionalism impressed the congressman and provided a stark contrast to the technical jargon and bureaucratic language that often characterized such hearings. General Walsh also testified, describing the military's response to Mitchell's discovery and the comprehensive review of inspection procedures that had been implemented across the fleet. The general's support for Mitchell's actions carried significant weight with the subcommittee members. Dr. Vasquez presented the technical findings in detail, using visual aids to show the damaged pump components and explain how the failure would have progressed during flight. Her presentation made it clear that Mitchell's analysis had been both accurate and crucial for preventing a disaster. The hearing revealed systemic issues that extended far beyond a single aircraft or base. Defense contractors had focused on meeting performance specifications without adequate attention to long-term reliability. Military inspection procedures had emphasized functional testing while neglecting predictive analysis that could identify developing problems. Congressman Sarah Williams, a former military officer herself, questioned the contractors about their quality control procedures. How is it possible that such severe component degradation could develop without being detected by your recommended inspection protocols? The contractor representatives struggled to provide satisfactory answers, their carefully prepared talking points failing to address the fundamental safety issues that Mitchell's discovery had exposed. Their discomfort was evident, as they attempted to deflect responsibility while promising improved procedures. Mitchell's testimony included her recommendations for improving safety protocols based on her experience with the X-47B incident. She advocated for incorporating historical trend analysis into routine inspections and providing advanced training for pilots and maintenance personnel in predictive failure analysis. The subcommittee members were particularly interested in understanding how military culture and organizational pressures might have influenced the situation. Mitchell addressed these concerns directly, acknowledging the enormous pressure to proceed with the mission while explaining how her training and professional judgment had guided her decision. The military teaches us to accomplish the mission, but it also teaches us that our first responsibility is to the safety of our people and our equipment, Mitchell testified. When those two imperatives conflict, safety must prevail. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez also testified, providing the perspective of an experienced maintenance professional. His support for Mitchell's actions and his insights into the practical challenges of aircraft inspection added credibility to her account. The hearing generated significant media attention, with news outlets portraying Mitchell as a hero who had prevented a potential disaster through careful analysis and courageous decision-making. The coverage helped raise public awareness about the complexities of military aviation safety and the importance of supporting personnel who identify potential problems. Behind the scenes, the incident was already driving significant changes in military aviation procedures. The analytical approach that Mitchell had used was being incorporated into training programs for test pilots and maintenance personnel. New inspection protocols were being developed that emphasized predictive analysis rather than simple functional testing. Defense contractors were also responding to the lessons learned from the incident. Design specifications were being revised to include more comprehensive reliability requirements, and quality control procedures were being enhanced to detect potential failure modes. Earlier in the development process, the X-47B program itself had been delayed by several months while comprehensive inspections were conducted on all aircraft in the fleet. Similar issues were discovered in 2 other aircraft, confirming that Mitchell's discovery represented a broader problem rather than an isolated incident. Mitchell's career prospects had been transformed by the incident. Rather than being viewed as an overly cautious pilot who had disrupted an important program, she was now recognized as an innovative thinker whose analytical skills had prevented a tragedy. Promotion opportunities and advanced training. Assignments were being offered to her by multiple commands. The congressional hearing concluded with strong bipartisan support for implementing Mitchell's recommendations and for recognizing her exceptional service. Congressman Davies announced that the subcommittee would continue monitoring the military's progress in improving aviation safety protocols. As Mitchell left the hearing room, she reflected on the unexpected path that had led her from a routine test flight to congressional testimony. Her decision to trust her professional instincts had not only validated her training and experience, but had also contributed to improving safety for military aviators across the entire fleet. The incident had demonstrated the importance of supporting military personnel who identify potential safety issues, even when those issues conflict with operational pressures or political expectations. Mitchell's willingness to risk her career for safety had ultimately strengthened both her profession and the military's commitment to protecting its people. The lessons learned from her careful analysis and decisive action would continue to influence military aviation safety for years to come, ensuring that future pilots and maintenance personnel would have better tools and procedures for identifying and preventing potential disasters. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Captain Mitchell stood once again beside the X-47B aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base. The aircraft looked identical to the casual observer, but extensive modifications had been made based on the lessons learned from her discovery. New inspection protocols, improved component designs, and enhanced predictive analysis systems had transformed the program into a model of aviation safety. The morning air was crisp as Mitchell conducted her pre-flight inspection, following procedures that now included many of the analytical techniques she had pioneered during the original incident. Other pilots throughout the military were being trained in these same methods, creating a new standard for thorough aircraft evaluation. Colonel Harrison, who had been promoted to Brigadier General, watched approvingly as Mitchell performed her inspection. The incident had enhanced his reputation as well, demonstrating his support for safety-conscious leadership and his ability to handle crisis situations effectively. "Ready for the first flight of the modified X-47B?" General Harrison asked, his tone reflecting both confidence and respect for Mitchell's judgment. Mitchell completed her final checks and nodded. "All systems show normal, sir. The new monitoring equipment provides much better visibility into component health, and the replacement hydraulic systems have been thoroughly tested." The program had ultimately been strengthened by the delay and investigation. The additional safety measures and improved inspection procedures had increased confidence among military leaders and congressional oversight committees. Rather than being viewed as a problematic program, the X-47B was now seen as an example of how safety concerns could be addressed effectively. Dr. Vasquez approached with her tablet, displaying real-time data from the aircraft's enhanced monitoring systems. The new equipment provided continuous analysis of component health, including the predictive algorithms that Mitchell had advocated for in her congressional testimony. "Captain, all systems are showing optimal performance," Dr. Vasquez reported. The new monitoring capabilities would have detected the original pump problem weeks before it became critical. The technological improvements represented a significant advancement in aviation safety. The lessons learned from Mitchell's careful analysis had been incorporated into design specifications for future aircraft, ensuring that similar problems would be identified and addressed before they could threaten flight safety. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, now serving as the senior maintenance advisor for the program, gave Mitchell a confident thumbs up. The relationship between pilots and maintenance personnel had been strengthened by the shared experience of working together to solve the hydraulic pump crisis. As Mitchell prepared for takeoff, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her decision to trust her professional instincts had initially seemed like a career-threatening choice, but it had ultimately led to improvements that would benefit military aviation for decades to come. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Mitchell smoothly advanced the throttles. The X-47B accelerated down the runway with the power and precision that had originally made it such a promising aircraft. As she lifted off, she felt the satisfaction of knowing that the aircraft was now as safe as human engineering and careful analysis could make it. The test flight proceeded flawlessly, with all systems performing within their designed parameters. The new monitoring equipment provided continuous feedback about component health, giving both the pilot and ground crews unprecedented visibility into the aircraft's condition. General Walsh, who had been promoted to the Pentagon and was visiting Edwards for the successful test flight, watched from the command center with obvious satisfaction. The incident that had initially threatened her program had ultimately made it stronger and more credible. Captain Mitchell's judgment and analytical skills have transformed not just this program, but our entire approach to aviation safety, General Walsh commented to the assembled officials. Her willingness to challenge conventional procedures has made all of our aircraft safer. After landing, Mitchell was greeted by a crowd of engineers, military officials, and media representatives who had gathered to witness the first flight of the improved X-47B. The successful test represented the culmination of months of intensive work to address the safety concerns she had identified. During the post-flight briefing, Mitchell described the aircraft's performance and the effectiveness of the new monitoring systems. Her technical expertise and communication skills had made her a sought-after speaker at aviation safety conferences and military training programs. The incident had also led to Mitchell's selection for advanced training and leadership positions that would have been unimaginable before her discovery of the hydraulic pump problem. Her analytical approach and decision-making under pressure had marked her as a future leader in military aviation. Dr. Vasquez announced that the improved inspection procedures and monitoring systems developed for the X-47B program were being implemented across the entire military aircraft fleet. The investment in safety technology would prevent similar incidents in the future and could potentially save hundreds of lives over the coming decades. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez spoke about the cultural changes that had resulted from the incident. Maintenance personnel were now encouraged to report any concerns, no matter how minor, and pilots were trained to look beyond basic checklists to understand their aircraft's overall health. As the day concluded, Mitchell realized that her refusal to launch 6 months earlier had created ripple effects that extended far beyond anyone's initial expectations. A single decision based on careful analysis and professional judgment had transformed military aviation safety protocols and potentially prevented multiple future accidents. The story of Captain Mitchell's refusal to launch had become a case study taught in military academies, aviation schools, and leadership programs. Her willingness to prioritize safety over schedule pressure had demonstrated the importance of supporting personnel who identify potential problems, even when those problems are inconvenient or costly to address. Standing beside the successfully tested X-47B, Mitchell understood that her career had been defined not by the missions she had flown, but by the mission she had refused to fly. Her careful analysis and decisive action had proven that sometimes the most important decision a pilot can make is the decision not to take off. The improved aircraft, enhanced safety procedures, and cultural changes that had resulted from her actions would continue protecting military aviators long after her own career had ended, creating a lasting legacy of safety and professionalism that honored the best traditions of military aviation.